Alrighty. The first video 100% left the intended audience. It was written with spite and bait in mind, with lots of exaggerations and hyperbole. Did I put on that emotional an act that people thought I was 100% serious? Shit, maybe I should get back into ghostwriting for tabloids. My job used to be professionally pissing people off. It'd pay more than making these anyway. Shame drama YouTubers have basically replaced that job, let alone most firms using AI these days and wanting prompt technicians instead. Basically, it was written as bait, and a lot of you fell for it. Well, the problems aren't that glaringly bad and unsalvageable, but they are present to different degrees. In turning them to 11, you get the previous video. As to what degree those issues are present, differ to each individual. At this point with Limbus Canto storytelling, each is more so down to emotional resonance. What you're willing to forgive or handwave is all down to taste and feeling. Someone who enjoys shonen anime despite its flaws would have zero issues with this Canto, whereas someone who is going out of their way to read Malazan Book of the Fallen is going to be screaming at the screen and pulling out their hair constantly. Those are two very extreme examples, but honestly most people would fall somewhere in between and probably enjoy Brandon Sanderson works or peak Marvel before the slopification of the franchise. Regardless, I personally resonated most with Canto 5 as being someone in a dead-end casino job that wanted something more exciting. Now I'm unemployed and have opinions on the internet. Not what I would call a glow-up or improvement necessarily, but alas, a lot of you watched the previous video, so that has to count for something. As for Canto 9, the easiest way I can profile this one is if you're a Souls-like fan. Mood, atmosphere, presentation are paramount here throughout parts 1 and 2. Yes, I'm gonna fucking say it. This Canto is like the Dark Souls of Cantos. Actually no, kill me. God, maybe I was born to be a games journalist. Oh wait, I was one once. On a more real note, this mirrors Akutagawa's works quite a lot. If nothing else, I can give the author credits for being able to generate a stifling sense of unease. Most, if not all of Akutagawa's period pieces have a feeling of oppressiveness and gloom. The original Rashomon, while light on plot, is oozing with dread from end to end. Yam Gruel is another one with plenty of unease. We can't help but feel that the Samurai Lord is leading our protagonist into a trap, but we can't quite prove it. Hellscreen though, that one regards an unreliable narrator and feels off from start to finish. After all, we're, for the most part, getting the perspective of a servant under Lord Horikawa, one that treats him as a godlike figure. He doesn't try too hard to read into Yoshihide or his daughter, only spurning us with Yoshihide's reputation and the bigger rumors in regards to the creation of the Hellscreen. Inner Grove only places emphasis on this notion as well, since that one regards several entirely unreliable counts on the murder victim and events of how it had come out. Anyhow, this kind of staging can be seen everywhere in Canto 9. We're not given perfect answers or reliable narrators for pretty much the entire thing. No one is 100% honest with us, nor are they revealing everything. There's always the sense that a key piece of information is missing, and that anyone could be lying to us. If I'm to quickfire a bunch of fellas willing to omit information or otherwise obscure their hand, Roshu herself. Though not by choice. Her memory has been mutilated. She doesn't give us all the facts until later on, and even then, with her memory being the way that it is, makes for an implicitly unreliable narrator. We get mostly memories of abuse, but few of where she would have otherwise went along with the whims of the nurse fathers. I feel like the missing good times are going to be really important for part 3, especially if we end up having the chance to spare certain characters rather than killing all of them. Alyssa. She's almost too perfectly positioned to betray the party. Somehow she conveniently survived, having the will to not pull out the spiral. Sure, she may have been unconscious at one point, but nonetheless, you can't help but feel a little suspicious of her. She somehow sends us down a path that avoids all the nurse fathers and challenges the sinners aren't capable of taking on. All the abnormalities are ones we've managed to suppress before. We don't run into the one or two that Hohenheim claims are difficult, rather troublesome to deal with. Instead, it's all the ones that the sinners are familiar with and can readily combat. It's all too convenient, painting Alyssa as rather suspect. Ezra and Moses. Both of them knew of Vesper's movements, but were unwilling to divulge his whereabouts or current mission. There are good odds that they knew he was returning from his color grading, and would provide major backup when he arrived. That said, they probably couldn't fully trust everyone in the room, and were already suspect of those within when we arrived. Letting the enemy somehow know of our movements would prove catastrophic. And well, it does. If they didn't hold back the trump card of Vesper, 2 of the split teams would be pasted. Instead, we only lose Martin in the end. The apprentices are all holding something back from us. While they're willing to divulge their surface intentions, we only get a hint of why they exist, and little of their individual intentions or the orders they've been given, at least not in full. This leads to the Ring and Pinky ones being at odds with one another, and Sora being a particularly terrible mole. In this regard though, Kira probably wears herself the most on her sleeve, but she doesn't really have that much of interest to divulge. She's more or less along for the ride, rather than any kind of strict purpose for the time being. Part 3 will likely have a lot more for her, same with the upcoming Ishmael ID. Personal guess is she'll be representative of the good times or, conversely, abandonment issues. It'll be one of the two. Then comes Faust. Bloody hell, there's a lot this time she has to hold back on. She knows a lot more about what's going on than she's letting on. But for the sake of the company and the plan, she's not able to intervene. We do, however, get some genuine emotion from her when Hohenheim and Martin are stranded with the Ring Nurse Father. It hadn't been since Warp Train, where she was cut off from the Gesellschaft, since we'd last seen that. Past the dialogue and actions of the above fellas, among others, there are many other contributing factors to the oppressive feeling within this canto. From a visual perspective, it's dark and dreary. The majority of the sequences are in low light or emergency light. The downtime in the broadcast room and the apprentice fights at the end of part 1 are the exception. Most of the rest are either in dark red or darker blue, with little else in between. The lack of variety in this case adds to the oppression, as the countless halls and corridors we slog through drum up our dread and anticipation for the next big encounter, whether it be with a nurse father or one of their apprentices. Adding further to this is the excellent music. It's not any kind of heroic or whimsy. If anything, most of the dialogue happens under this glitchy, unnerving soundtrack. It starts with off-key notes that give the impression of haze or falsehood. Like, nothing is adding up no matter how hard you try to put the pieces together. That's genuinely perfect for the scenario that the canto places you in. Furthermore, each of the different fingers has its own score. Each of them are on the drearier side. They're all pieces that could fit in different crime shows or mobster media. The thumbs track is Mafia-like, same with the Ring, though that one is a bit higher class with the keys. The index track is more cult-like or religious, and well, the Pinky's one is Yakuza reminiscent. Well, more so feels like a piece out of Katana Zero to me, but I digress. The effort placed into the score has a tangible impact on the scenes where they're employed in full. As for the music utilized for the past, some of them are surprisingly warm. We get a sense of Roshu's emotions when regarding the Index Father and her daughter. Heck, even the thread dangled in front of her by Faust. During that sequence, we get to see a contract clause directly too, providing further clarity on what's offered to the sinners. Even if it's that little, Roshu was willing to cast aside everything just to ensure she'd see her child again. Finally, one last pitch with the presentation. The animation budget went up a lot. As mentioned with the prior video, if you were a moth, you were damn happy. We get several fully animated cutscenes within, whether it be Virgilius bearing down onto Valencia, the apprentices throwing hands at one another, Vesper's 2 entrances, Matthias going all out, or even the Pinky's after-image cuts. We're given plenty of flashy lights and animation that Project Moon had placed plenty of work into. They may be hype moments and aura, yes, but you can't say it's low-quality stuff. We're not getting a Captain America Avengers Assemble moment with a pause for audience clapping and cheers. Nah, they run it back almost immediately, which I can appreciate. It's not as shallow as some would make it out to be, thankfully. Anyhow, presentation aside, we've got the combat this canto. I've said my piece on the mannequins. I know how they function, but when spammed out as much as they were, such a stally opponent in an unfocused encounter is nasty. As for their feel in focused encounters, they work really good there since we got a lot more control, and the emphasis is placed on clearing rather than low turn count. That's when they work, but more specifically during Lucio's node in 9-3. There's no defending the Pecatula spam. While they're expected to be around in the LCE, they're not exactly fun to fight. It can be reckoned that they add the drowning feeling of pushing through the corridors, but they offer too much frustration and feeling like filler. The Abnos, on the other hand, they did surprise me a bit with their gameplay updates. They're not strictly an add unbreakable coins and woe be upon ye kind of update, but instead each of them have more unique mechanics tied to them. The Fey Lantern buffs sinners and feels more methodical than clashing everything and go. The Wayward Passenger, well, that one was already a solid fight. It just needed more HP, and that's what we got for the most part. Ebony Stem, I know, tortured a lot of people on the other hand. Considering we just went through a season of Rupture, having to go against it again was painful on its own. That said, as long as you uprooted the cunt, it was fine. Past those three, we have the Shock Centipede and the Ardor Star Blossom Moth. The former is a stally fight towards the end, but so long as you sequence properly and keep the spark charge down, it's very manageable. As for the Moth, fuck this thing. I remember this guy clapping my ass at least twice before I finally bursted down the wings to rush it down. Overall though, the improvements made to the Abnos do make them a lot more scary to go up against. Unfortunately, they're now our dailies, but that gives us more meat to chew on in the interim. Next, we can talk about the various apprentices we go up against. Lucio is a fun time. It's a dance between clashing him and clashing his mannequins. So long as you alternate between the two properly, it's an easy time, but seeing his potential ramp is rather insane. If there is a version of the fights where he could more easily stack up the dual stats, or give us no way to nullify them fully, I reckon we'd have a really fun dance out of it. He also has two swords. He was trained in the style Roshu was. I reckon that means Roshu would originally be fighting with both her sheath and sword at the same time. This would be closer to how some samurai fought, depending on their blade of choice. The Roshu's one is quite large, so perhaps not. Regardless, there's further ceiling for this fight to go, as Lucio was ordered to only stall rather than kill. As for the Pinky and Ring fights, they both have some interesting mechanics. The Pinky's focus on guards and counters stands out far more than the Ring's gimmick, though both of them were holding back, as when the Ring wishes to get more serious, she's denied the chance to do so. We're 100% going to be facing them down again. If it's another tag team situation, that'd be appreciated, though then again the possibility is open for all five to tag team with one another. Sora on the other hand is a monster of a fight. She starts as rather manageable, so long as you keep her prescripts unfulfilled. If you let her ramp up though, the Shin, Mung and Ethelblessed ego become more and more tricky to deal with. Even if you pull a Chesed, if you haven't successfully ramped your sanity and ego resources, it becomes exceedingly hard to keep up with. This means that she can mince each sinner one by one if you aren't careful. Unfortunately, the fight's difficulty does get undermined by an invincible Roshu and the eventual arrival of Vespa, but those are rather inevitable. Finally, we can talk about the Pinky Nurse Father. Her gimmick is pretty close to Argalia, at least in terms of the traces, though rather than needing to reverberate with them, she just gets stacking bonuses. She applies a stupid amount of statuses, ramps to ridiculous degrees, and if engaged incorrectly, will 100% tear your team to shreds. This means that she's surprisingly a difficult boss if you don't read and comprehend the way her attacks work. Although there is a funny caveat to that. You don't actually have to think that hard with this fight due to the way the win rate system targets its attacks. This fight is weirdly easy to hit the win rate button on, and in doing so, you accidentally process the mechanics of hitting her weaker clashes to weaken her harder ones. If you're having trouble with it, you can slot particularly good clashers and just P-enter to victory. Since it's another fight with an invincible Roshu, this fight is unfortunately a lot more spectacle than challenge. Regardless though, there are definitely improvements and changes in combat, even if it doesn't feel that way from time to time. There's thought and intention with each of these fights, although you can feel some of the rough edges here and there. They definitely had some proper direction in mind. In this regard, I'm expecting a huge boss rush for part 3, maybe akin to some of the weirder mirror dungeon packs we get at higher levels. At least that's the way I see things currently being set up, in having 10 different antagonists to face off against. Anyhow, the most important part to note here is the gameplay clarity. While it's rather garish and blatant, the highlighter across enemy skills does make it a lot easier to understand what the skills do. It's like getting an annotated or Sparks Notes version of the game. You can, of course, turn this off if you'd rather prefer to deduce things yourself. Though there are some funny cases here and there where despite the egregious amount of highlighter, you have to question what the hell they were thinking. The single turn where the Ring Apprentice multiplies her damage by 20 times is one of those. It's so in your face about it that you have to question whether or not there was more to it. But nope, there really wasn't. I'm going to laugh if in part 3 you have to get someone to hit her during that turn in order to prevent things from getting even worse down the line. let's get into the more lore-heavy tidbits that are handled rather well. We get characterization and background for a few sinners this time around. Besides Roshu, we have pieces for Don, Heathcliff, Otis, Faust, and Masault. The rest get smaller amounts, but Hongers specifically gets absolutely nothing. Anyhow, to rapid fire, Otis has mentions of her past against Euryalus of the Argos unit, essentially Greek mythology in regards to the Odyssey. Don expresses their willingness to release Sancho if it means saving her found family. She would have no regrets if allowed to do so, although she is warned off by Faust and the others. Heathcliff shows off his intuition and wits when it comes to surviving situations on the back foot. He doesn't charge in with reckless abandon and instead cares for his team's safety. Faust shows some level of attachment to Hohenheim's crew and her fellow researchers. He's also privy to far more than we're allowed to know in regards to the golden bows, especially in the resonance effects. Last, Masault is a fucking freak. The guy is actively people watching and stalking them in his free time. Someone that large doing that ought to be some level of creepy. But knowing there was more intentionality there is even more than we could have hoped for, really. Aside from that, there are a few specific scenes I would like to highlight. First is the pre-Nurse Father fights with Dante's reckless Durante use. Even knowing his current options and the resonance he's capable of, he still attempts to force out a Durante ability. This is exceedingly reckless, especially with the kind that he tries to activate. The other times, it was under the duress of failing the mission. This time shouldn't have been any different, and yet, the power eludes him and he forcibly reaches into places he shouldn't. He jumps pretty much to the bottom of the tree and drags out powers far beyond his comprehension. He goes mad and starts speaking of fates and elements beyond, similar to when he went berserk during To Claim Your Bones. There's a lot of speculation as to what all of it means, but ultimately people hearken this back to the Thoth Tarot specifically. Not the Rider White one, but the Thoth Tarot that is about 8 different cards in the Arcana. These are the Magus, the Priestess, Lust, Fortune, Adjustment, the Art, the Aeon, and the Universe. There are more to it beyond that, but far too much to cover today. Maybe sometime in the future I'll get around to covering the implications. Regardless, he summons the IDs of the sinners to his side in some madhouse fashion and causes them to all drop unconscious at their relevant locations. This mistaken judgment has long-running ramifications, making Dante directly responsible for getting Martin killed off later. Anyhow, this shows that Dante can make mistakes too, and that's similar to last time. Durante is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Each time he busts it out has caused some long-running ramifications of some kind, although some may not be quite as prevalent as others. Pilgritia eats a ridiculous amount of time, at least T-Corp hours. Superbia isn't quite as direct, but did let Don face off against the father, functionally destroying a bloodline and having her inherited. Morositus is the weakest here, although it does make it so physical prowess is no longer a factor for the sinners. Skill and acumen is the deciding factor. There's not as much long-running ramifications on this one, though it does infinitely scale. If we ever run into an Arbiter or Claw, perhaps we'll last more than a few seconds at least. As for facing off against the head itself, perhaps there's a future angle to look at there. Regardless, forcing the Sapling of Light's ability here is a huge mistake on the behalf of Dante, and I wouldn't be surprised if Hohenheim holds some kind of resentment for him having done so. Next I'd want to speak on is Hohenheim and Martin's last stand, a beautiful hue of teal. This one is a proper tragedy since we know exactly what caused it, even if the two involved do not. They just don't know that the LCB failed to hold the line for whatever reason, and at least one of them needs to live in order to salvage the facility and save everyone else. It's previously set up to Boots that Hohenheim was the one who jerry-rigged everything to work here. We already know the answer. As much as Hohenheim insists that he could hold off the Ring Nurse Father for longer, the difference in time it would take for Martin to comprehend what Hohenheim had rigged up was the determining factor. While there is a world where both of them could have lived, the consequences of Dante's actions echo through here the most by far. We already know that Hohenheim is done with letting his colleagues sacrifice themselves on his behalf. He's quite adamant on letting Martin live, but alas, he can't argue for his colleague knowing what's at stake. In the previous video, a few of you thought the tragedy I mentioned was for Martin. Nah, it's all on Hohenheim. Even when he had his colleague's life right in front of him, he was doomed to let him die. He gives some parting words to the Ring Nurse Father, even while Martin readies himself for the last stand. To his credits, Martin puts up a surprisingly good fight before kicking the bucket. If we get the rupture stacks starting on the Ring Father when we face up against him, it's going to be real funny. Funnier still if we start the fight suddenly with some ego resources due to Martin's death. Though since enough time has passed since the fight, I doubt the effects will show up. Perhaps we'll get a Hohenheim ally during the encounter if one happens at all. And knowing how the big bird works, perhaps Hohenheim wants to tank for us. Regardless, the raid on the House of Spiders is now very personal for him. Last, I'd like to cover the sheer desperation of Roshu when presented with the vault. Although it is inevitably empty, we are privy to just how much planning and calculating she had done, engraving the vault combination into her body so that no matter what, she wouldn't lose it. Her instant drop into despair speaks volumes of its contents, the amount of value she had placed on her child, much like the original Yoshihide. Where this differs from the original fellow though, is she completely passes out. Nothing was more important to her compared to the artist, where in the original stared at their child burning to death in the pursuit of art. Roshu differentiates herself essentially in its denial, that in the end, the safety of the child was likely a pipe dream. It was the one piece of hope she could latch onto. Now, not knowing what has exactly become of her, the House of Spiders raid has the potential to end in a far worse fate than that of Hellscreen anyhow. To add on to this fate though, these kinds of stasis and preservation chambers usually had the big caveat that nothing living should be placed in them. Rather, you really shouldn't place anything inside of there. The scratch marks and sheer desperation show just how unbearable it was to be inside there for an extended period of time. The last time the party fucked with time dilation was the warp train. If this was anything similar, then without the restoration and subsequent wipe of memories, the child would be scarred forever stuck in a vault, with only themselves for company. Now, if the House of Spiders had gotten the child after they had been left out in that kind of vault, abandoned for all that time, then perhaps they'd follow the whims of the Nurse Fathers more so. This leads to the one theory that I'd like to explore further this time around. Last video, I went rather quick over the Pinky Nurse Fathers potentially being the child. There's a little more evidence that points that way when you look over her kits. Rather, that's how some fellas are coming to see it. The imposed after image makes it seem like it may not be the original under the cloth, but perhaps the daughter. People also like to stare specifically at the panic type called affection and resentment. While it is possible this is just in relation to the Nurse Father herself, others like to point to this as the child seeking the mother's affections as she's driven to the brink, especially with the effect specifically being tied to Roshu. Further than that is the portion where the Pinky Apprentice refers to Roshu as is rather than as Yoshihide, whereas almost everyone else from the house calls her Yoshihide. While these are of course speculation and theories, it seems to more or less be the leading one, so we'll see how it all goes down in less than 24 hours. Regardless, that's my piece on the better parts this Canto has to offer. Yes, a bunch of you probably want my more honest thoughts rather than the embellished ones for the negative parts, but we'll leave that for after the finale. For the hope and doom chuds that were throwing me into the 4chan thread though, the heck are you guys smoking? Give me some of that. Hope this video coming out confuses the heck out of you lot watching from over there. As for the rest of ya, hope you didn't get drawn in too hard by the negative content and rage baits. Although that was the intention with the way I wrote it. It's still kind of embarrassing that that's the video that crosses the 5-digit mark compared to the rest of them. Would rather not be known strictly for that one, but I digress. It was a video originally meant to hit like 2k at most, instead garnering assassinations on my character. That said, if I release another like that in future, please think for yourselves whether or not it is bait or overblown for the clicks. And please spare yourself from wasting your time watching media criticism that's meant to piss you off. If you're the kind that enjoys that stuff, go watch some Plinkant reviews. That aside, in summary, the looming dread and atmospheric elements of this Canto interplay exceedingly well, coupled with the sheer number of unreliable narrators and threads we've been given to latch onto, and either the following part is going to be golden or fall apart at the seams. It is, in essence, the embodiment of an Akutagawa work. Regardless, like the end of the previous video, I'm hoping for it to be golden, and for the previous video to age like milk, and for this one to age like wine. Mind you, I am still an Akutagawa hater, so maybe this one still won't resonate with me anyway. Thanks for watching again, all the more so if you took the baits from the last one. It's rare that positive content will resonate quite as much with the audience, so if this one ever eclipses the former, that'd be nice, but I severely doubt it. I'll be streaming the moment it releases, so go easy on me if you don't mind. The next video after that is going to be an ID guide for one of the sinners I haven't covered yet, so it'll be one of those too late to the party kind of affairs.